G'day folks, Troy Dean here from WP Elevation and welcome to another episode of the WP Elevation podcast. And that's right, on this episode we talk about pornography, putting condoms on bananas and what motivates human behaviour. Our guest this week is none other than Adam Ferrier, one of Australia's most successful and well-known advertisers. He's also a clinical psychologist. He's written a book called The Advertising Effect. He's a regular guest on TV shows here in Australia. And he's an all-round, very smart, very nice, very humble guy. And it was an absolute pleasure to have him on the podcast. My wife actually had Adam on her podcast, and she was the one that introduced me to him. So it was a pleasure to close that loop and to unpack a little bit of Adam's brain about what it is that motivates human behavior and how you can use those factors to change people's behavior and influence them. And we also talk about some of the challenges of starting a brand new agency from the ground up, which Adam and his business partners are doing right now. It's a great episode. Stay with us.
This is the WP Elevation Podcast, helping WordPress consultants elevate.
Hey Elevators, Troy Dean here from WP Elevation. I'm very pleased to have with me in the studio here Adam Ferrier. Adam Ferrier, welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Now, for those that don't know, and I'm assuming that because of most of our audience are based on the other side of the planet, they may not know where you're from. So what's your elevator pitch? Who are you and what are you doing?
My name's Adam Ferrier, from a founder of an agency called Tinkerbell. My background's clinical psychologist who got into advertising. So both of those things are about behaviour change. So psychologists kind of change people's behaviour one-on-one or in groups. Advertising changes people's behaviour whether they want it changed or not en masse. And I kind of put both of those things together, and that's what I'm like. I'm a behaviour change kind of person who understands a bit of brand strategy and a bit about creativity.
Awesome. There's lots I want to unpack in this conversation, and I thank you very much for coming in. I know you've just launched the new agency Tinkerbell, which we'll talk about in a moment. You've also written a book called The Advertising Effect. You've been on multiple television shows here in Australia. My wife is a total fangirl of yours, and she actually had you on her podcast.
Yes,
and
yeah,
I can see
she was
very nervous the night before she interviewed you. She was like, oh my God, I'm interviewing Adam tomorrow. And that's how I came to know you. So talk to me first of all, before we talk about Tinkerbell, and before we talk about change behaviour, talk to me about writing the book and the TV appearances. What came first?
I think what came before both of those is narcissism and a degree and a desire to be out there, right, and thinking myself worthy enough to put my content out there.
Right.
So I think that desire's always kind of been there.
Because this is actually the actual point that I wanted to talk about. Yeah. The book and the TV thing is a way of you putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
A lot of the people I know watching this and listening to this will have all sorts of enormous psychological barriers with doing that. Did you have to overcome any kind of self-doubt or imposter syndrome to write a book and put yourself on television?
I should say yes, but no, which is even more pathological, I think. Right. So I think, I learnt years ago that being different was always often sometimes better than being right. And people just wanted to hear a fresh opinion or a different opinion. And there's so much data and there's so many opinions, it's very hard to know what's the right thing to do. So if you're adding something new to the equation, then you're probably kind of, if you're semi-intelligent, adding something. So I always kind of felt like I had an opinion and a voice. When I studied psychology and advertising, it dawned on me 10 years ago that both of those kind of things are in the business of behaviour change, and that everyone's in the business of behaviour change. So no matter what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to get your kid to eat their vegetables, whether you're trying to start a new business, whether you're trying to get more clients, whether you're trying to get people to listen to your radio station or your podcast, whatever it is, you're trying to change people's behaviour. And not that many people have codified how to change behaviour. And so that's kind of what I wanted, that's what I set out to do. The flip side of that is I have a love-hate relationship with consumerism. I love it because it's good for the GDP, gets people to buy stuff, raises the kind of living standards, but it creates lots of anxiety, depression, false promises and all that kind of stuff. So the more I talk about it, the more I kind of feel like I'm also informing people on how marketing and advertising works and how people are trying to change your behaviour, and then what you can do about it as well.
Yeah. So you wrote the book. I love Gruen, Gruen Transfer, Gruen Planet. For those that don't know, Gruen is a series of shows here in Australia which kind of demystify advertising and kind of debunk all the myths around advertising, and they dissect advertising campaigns and show you what works and what doesn't. It's a fantastic show, Gruen. Check it out if you haven't seen it. So did you write the book and then kind of get those TV appearances? Is that kind of the way it worked?
I did my thesis in clinical psychology on identifying the underlying constructs of cool people. And when I wrote my thesis, I wanted it to be commercialised and I wanted it to be publicised, and that went global. And so and then for a short period of time, I was a cool hunter.
Right.
So I kind of always in the back of my head kind of wanted to have a degree of influence. Then through doing that and so on, they asked me to join the Gruen team, and then during that time, I think I published the book while I'm doing the Gruen stuff.
Got it. How traumatic was writing a book?
Not traumatic at all.
Really?
It was very easy, just sprouted out, and I did have a co-author who helped me structure it and tailor it a little bit as well, Jen Fleming.
Did you write or did you dictate?
Wrote like the bejesus.
Right.
Gardening leave is a good time to, although lots of people here are not going to have time, but if you exit somewhere and go on gardening leave, that's a good time to write a book.
Gardening leave. Fantastic. All right. Now, so you studied psychology before advertising?
Both of them. So I went to a tutor at school to find out what I should be. He said, "What are your interests?" I said, "Money and people." And then he said I should become a consumer psychologist.
Right.
And so I studied. Wow. Yeah, I know, pretty crazy, huh?
Wow. You actually got really good counselling, career counselling,
I know.
and took it.
Who gets that?
No one. No one that I've ever met.
No, exactly. It's amazing.
Wow.
As a 17-year-old.
Wow.
And so I studied psychology, studied commerce, knew that it's always what did I want to do, combined those two things, did my master's, as I said. Then got sidetracked into forensic psychology, went to the prison system for a while.
Oh, that's right.
And then did the cool hunting thing, market research, advertising.
Right. How was the prison psychology work?
It's great, amazing. Like when you deal with the extremes of humanity, it makes everything much more clear. So I've got lots and lots of obvious examples in my head of how we do things and why we do things that I can then kind of draw upon to exemplify the concept I'm trying to make.
Wow. For those that aren't aware, you should check out, this is a shameless plug for my wife's podcast, weallwearitdifferently.com. Go check out that episode where my wife interviews Adam because they go into more detail around that. So there you go, shameless plug there. So I'm curious, influences, we were talking before off camera, I've read Influence by Robert Cialdini. I'm a big fan of Cialdini's work. I love influence and the ability to change people's behaviour, because shamelessly there's two sides to this coin. One, I think it gives you power, but B, I actually think it gives you power to help people, because if you can't get their attention and you can't influence their behaviour, you can't help them. So I consider myself a marketer and a communication strategist, and I've definitely noticed over the years that there are things you can do to influence people's behaviour. I wish that some of the things didn't work that do, like scarcity, but they do. How does your approach differ to, say, what people might be familiar with reading something like Influence by Cialdini?
I don't think it necessarily does. So just on that, I think two things. Advertising's only evil when it advertises evil things.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing with influence. You're only being evil if you use the powers for evil.
Yeah.
In terms of Cialdini's stuff is absolutely fantastic, and I agree with most of it, and most of it seems to make really good sense, and is a very clear communicator. And I don't think it matters what guru you listen to or whose theory you subscribe by, as long as you set yourself a foundation of how the world works and how humans work, and that's pretty robust, and then you just build into that knowledge base all the time. Because if you don't have a framework or a foundation, then you're kind of constantly getting little scatter bits of information here and there. And I think especially in the online space where everything gets so sucked up and all the kind of the biases get sucked up and you should do this and you should do that, there's so much little bits of information. If you don't understand a framework of decision making or of a human sitting there in front of a device, whatever it is that you're trying to do, then it's hard to know where to apply that. And then a lot of that knowledge doesn't stick. So if you read Cialdini's Influence, and you see a good enough framework for that to build all of your knowledge from, then just stick to that. That'll do.
And so for the lay person, or in the time that we have, if there were one or two things that someone could do to start to maybe increase the impact they're having or influence people's behaviour in a greater way, what do you think in terms of, we're talking specifically here about in terms of communication or marketing or what they do on their website or what they do at a keynote presentation or how they present themselves at a networking breakfast? What's some of the low-hanging fruit that they can apply?
I came across a model many years ago called the MOA model, which is motivation, opportunity and ability. I also studied what big behaviour change theorists kind of accounted for, what they thought accounted for the most behaviour change in psychology, which was a few conferences in around 1996. And then I looked at behavioural economics. And behavioural economics is kind of codifying a lot of this kind of stuff for psychologists, and psychologists should have been doing this stuff originally. Long story short, boils down to kind of two key factors for me, which is kind of motivation and ease. So how motivated somebody is to do something, how easy it is for them to do something. So there's a guy called BJ Fogg who talks about motivation and ability. For all intents and purposes, same thing. He put them on an XY axis. I've put them on an XY axis. Higher the motivation, higher the ease, the more likelihood that people do what you want them to do. Most people think they're in the game of increasing people's motivation to do stuff. That's really, really hard to do, and it's the only way you can do that is by creating a completely new category or a completely new thing. What you're normally trying to do is increase people's ease to go towards you rather than a competitor. And so that's the framework that I use, motivation and ease. And I'm normally thinking most problems, or most behaviour change problems, are ease-based things. As a really quick side, there's a mate of mine who used to work for me, who's now gone off to be a Silicon Valley squillionaire, called Rob Perkins, created a website called OMG Yes. Now, OMG Yes is a really interesting website because before OMG Yes, there was pornography, which is now teaching people how to have really bad sex, and there was sexual education, which was just weird. And so he's put those two things...
Putting condoms on bananas.
That's right, putting condoms on bananas. He's put those two things together to create kind of this kind of eduporn kind of category.
Oh, wow.
And it teaches men and women how to help women have more pleasurable sex, which is missing from there, right? The only reason I tell all of this is the exception to ease is when you create something new or you create something desirable enough that it doesn't have competitors, and then your job is really about you're solving a motivation issue there.
Wow, there is lots to unpack there. If only we had another hour. OMG Yes is the website there. Watch this first, then go check out OMG Yes. Close that browser tab, come back here. You've been involved in a couple of campaigns that people here in Australia will definitely be familiar with. When you're at Cummins and Partners, you're involved in the I Bought a Jeep campaign. Yeah,
that's right.
Why that? And funny, because we were talking about this off camera before, and when you Google the I Bought a Jeep campaign, what actually ranks is a lot of parodies around the I Bought a Jeep campaign. Why do you, and if you haven't seen it, go Google I Bought a Jeep and have a look at some of the ads. Why do you think the I Bought a Jeep campaign was so successful?
I'm going to do something really bad and not answer your question at all. I'm going to answer another question and I'm going to come back to it. Okay. Another campaign which has been global, which is called Share a Coke, which is something I was involved in at a previous agency, where people will put their names on a can of Coke. Yes. And that's been probably globally the most successful campaign Coke's ever done in its
I remember that.
In its life, and it's been replicated all around the world and so on. So it's been really successful. And the reason why I think that was successful was because it was called Share a Coke, and Coke was asking other people to buy them a Coke. We were asking you to buy a Coke for your mates. Gotcha. So find a person with their name on it and give them a Coke. First time ever that Coke's ever asked anybody to do them a favour rather than just talking at you, trying to get you to buy Coke. The reason why that's successful, we think, is a couple of things. It gives people a sense of ownership of the brand. I see names on it, see my name, friends' names on the can of Coke, which is that lets me into the brand, got a sense of ownership. The other thing is Coke's asking you to do them a favour, and that's something which is a little bit different coming back to your Cialdini's thing. Cialdini talks about reciprocity, and which is about, if you do something for me, I'll do something back for you. The corollary of that is you do something for me, then you're much more likely to keep on doing things for me. Yep. And so if you get somebody to do you a favour, they'll like you more for having done that favour for you, because they'll kind of post-rationalise it post-rationalised me as having been worthy of doing a favour for.
Yeah.
So I think what the Share a Coke campaign did, or does, is every time you buy Coke and share a Coke with somebody, you're rationalising Coke as being worthy of sharing, and so it kind of increases your likability towards it. So I really like that campaign. I really like being involved in it, and there's and then on the Jeep stuff, Jeep is really kind of about social norming. So before we came along, Jeep was a kind of a pretty extraordinary purchase, had a very small market share in Australia. At Cummins and Partners, we kind of acknowledged that, and then we developed a campaign that kind of fed that straight back to the viewer and made it seem like an extraordinary purchase seemed ordinary by getting lots and lots of different people to kind of acknowledge they bought a Jeep. And we started this vernacular saying, I bought a Jeep, yes, you bought a Jeep. I bought a Jeep, you bought a Jeep, you bought a Jeep, you bought a Jeep. And it kind of, and so it goes.
And so it normalised buying a Jeep.
It normalised buying a Jeep massively.
And it was a very successful campaign, and it was very annoying in the end, and because it penetrated your psyche, and it kind of made you feel like you weren't normal if you didn't buy a Jeep. In fact, when I bought my Mazda, I test drove a Jeep because of that campaign.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about that campaign is as soon as you buy a new car, it gave you an excuse online to go, I bought a Jeep, and then everyone goes, oh, you bought a Jeep, I bought a Jeep, you bought a Jeep. And the whole campaign just kind of blew up. It would be the most successful social campaign ever in Australia, but there wasn't a single cent spent in social media on the campaign.
Wow. So if I want to talk about Thinkabell in a moment, this is the new agency that you've launched and some of the challenges around that, but if I am a branding freelancer or an online digital marketer and I've got this new client that comes in and they're launching a new brand and they tell me a little bit about what it is they're trying to achieve, how can I start to think about, we know that a brand is more than a logo and a colour palette and a font set. How do I start to think about how this brand is going to influence consumers' behaviour right from what's your process to sort of start that
It's
thinking?
a really interesting question. At first I'd ignore the consumer and I wouldn't really worry about them. I'd just kind of work out what you want to stand for, what you think your place in the world is, and build assets that communicate whatever the hell it is that you want to communicate. And be really, really clear on that, and be really true to your own vision, and be confident with that, and just be really clear about what you stand for, and assume that they'll come. Once you have that in place, and once you really understand all the assets of what your brand's about, what you're trying to put out to the world, your look and feel, being incredibly consistent, build some distinctive assets that you use over and over and over again, and be absolutely consistent with, put them everywhere, the kind of Coke model of the red, the ribbon, the cursive font, all of that kind of stuff, contour bottle. Once you've got all of that in that suite of assets, only then start to think about how am I going to use those now to change somebody's behaviour. So separate the building of the brand, which is your vision, what you stand for, and then that's it. And then I'd work out how to change behaviour, and then to change behaviour, I'd work out what's my business goal, whose behaviour do I need to change to reach that goal, who's going to account for the most variance of me reaching the goal. What are the triggers and barriers against motivation and ease to reach that goal, and then start to break it down from there, and then start to put in strategies or action plans against those.
Wow, fascinating. I could unpack this and talk about that for a whole week, but we haven't got time, unfortunately. Now, Thinkabell you've launched this new agency, Thinkabell, and you were previously at Cummins and Partners. So you had some gardening leave. You're back with Thinkabell. Talk to me about why another agency? Why are you still in this space? Why are you not off running group therapy sessions and helping people solve their problems?
I could talk about that for a week. I'd love to be doing that. When I used to work at Saatchi & Saatchi. I used to work there during the day, and then used to run men's groups in the evening, and that was really kind of nice, just trying to balance the two. So I'd love to do that, and part of doing the book is also just trying to balance out the psychology with the advertising. I love ideas, I love creativity. I think at the end of the day, I just happen to have got into the marketing science behaviour changing space. I really love creativity, and I really love kind of influence and, I guess, power as well. And I find the whole advertising world fascinating because of its creativity. So that's kind of the main. So I want to stay. I like this space. I want to stay in it. I want to do a whole lot of it. I want to be an architect. I want to be a psychologist. I want to do lots and lots of other things as well. But this is where I am. The agency, I've started an agency in Australia called Naked, which was part of a global chain many years ago, and I loved building an agency from the ground up. Loved that experience, and I found fantastic partners and doing the same thing. So just enjoying building an agency from the ground up. So developing the logo, developing the name, developing the proposition. I just love all of that stuff. I love doing it for clients, and I love doing it for myself.
Does it the energy in starting something? Do you kind of have to have that conversation with yourself to say, okay, Adam, are we ready to put? Because it's exhausting, isn't it?
Yes, it is exhausting. Like you put in lots of hours.
Yeah.
But it feels like, to me, time is like one of those piano accordions. It's kind of infinitely expandable. You can do as much as you want or as little as you want, and kind of like the more you do, the more you do. It just kind of doesn't. So it kind of feels like there's always time to do more if you're into it. So I find it creates, so as well as being tiring, it creates its own energy as well, I guess. I have no idea where I'm going with that.
No, that's okay. Just the whole concept of starting something from scratch, finding a suite of clients, getting the clients signed up, hiring staff. Did at any point were you overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work in front of you?
No.
Excellent.
No.
Brevity is the essence of wit.
and not a good podcast, right?
Correct.
Yes. But I'm not overwhelmed by it. I kind of enjoy it. I thrive in mess. I thrive in chaos, and I thrive in being unstructured. But I think that's coming back to that advice before about be clear about what you stand for. If you're really, really clear about that, so much of your decision making is taken care of. Like for us, our proposition is around measured magic, which is about scientific inquiry meets hardcore creativity. That's what we do. So the office design, the logo, the business cards, everything. We've just got a really, really, really clear kind of point. And so that makes lots of maybe tiring or exhausting decisions not tiring, exhausting, because they become quite simple, if you know what I mean. And so the tighter you can get that little thing, then the more easier the rest of it comes. And the business we're not booming. Like, business isn't fantastic. It's not like we're not yelling at each other and having fighting matches sometimes, or doing shit that's boring or horrible. I'm not trying to paint a really glossy picture. There's loads and loads of things we're doing wrong, hundreds. But I kind of enjoy the mess as well.
The process of working that all out. And if your why is really clear, not to simplify it too much, but if your why is really clear, then the what and the how kind of just find themselves and you work them out, right? Because you're staying true to your path. Yeah.
Although I'm not going to credit Simon Sinek for for our.
Are you a fan of Simon Sinek?
I'm a fan of anybody who can simplify something complicated and communicate it, and he's done that wonderfully.
And maybe add a different slant. I'm a fan of Dan Sullivan, who's written this book called. He's got a fantastic podcast called Exponential Wisdom with Peter Diamandis. And he wrote a great book called Unique Process Advisors, where he took 10 financial advisors who were kind of, maxed out working on commissions and retainers, and they basically 10x their business. They all 10x their business by taking what they knew and repackaging it into a unique process. They basically made up a framework and went, this is now our process. Do you think there's some merit in it? It's kind of like creating the category or creating a whole
I want to read that. That sounds really interesting, and I'm big into that. And the more you can replicate, the more you can have a process, then the less you need to rely again on thinking about how you're going to solve something. You can put it into the process, and that will do the job for you a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you look at the management consultancies, they can, for example, they can replicate how to solve big kind of complex business problems because they have their processes and their systems so well in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, big fan of that. Doesn't come naturally, but I like that. And also, advertising agencies historically have been terrible at branding themselves. So they're all kind of much of a muchness. They all have a kind of a similar way of operating. Very few of them have ownable IP or replicable processes. It all revolves around just buying in really good talent. So we're kind of proud of ourselves for creating what we think is quite a nice distinctive brand within an agency, within a category that doesn't brand itself particularly well.
Check out Dan Sullivan, Unique Process Advisors is the book that we just mentioned there. I used to wear a t-shirt that said I make stuff up, because it's true, I do make stuff up, and I learned over the years that that's what most people do.
Yeah.
It's okay, isn't it, to make stuff up?
I think so. I think I think it is. I think it's great.
As long as it's unique, and as long as it's adding value, and as long as you're finding a new and a different way to communicate something, and as long as it's based on why it is you're doing what you're doing, and you're staying true to your vision.
I think that sounds fine. I think I'd like a person more if they just had a t-shirt saying I make stuff rather than I make stuff up.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that'd be, and I thought there might be a double play on make stuff, because I think making stuff, creating stuff, just making sure. It's interesting. Like, this is partly a motivational kind of conversation, isn't it? And I think just putting shit out there or giving stuff a go is incredibly important. And somebody once said to me, and I do like this piece of advice. They said, if you don't have a goal, then just make one up, and just create it and do that, and then along that journey something else will come up.
That's right.
Yeah, so you don't even have to. It doesn't have to be real. You just have to have something. And
because it gets you moving.
Yeah,
and then and you're right. And then while you're moving, you find other things, and you might end up being over here. I remember being at university, getting in university, and being halfway through my first year of a Bachelor of Educational Theatre, and thinking, oh my God, I do not want to be a drama teacher.
Yeah.
And I had this crisis because I thought,
you'd make a good drama teacher.
Yeah, well, thanks, but there's many reasons why I don't want to be a drama teacher. We can explore that later. But I kind of had that moment. I'm like, this is everything I've wanted, and now I don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
But if I didn't go after something I wanted in the first place, then I wouldn't have learnt that about myself, and I wouldn't have discovered that. Do you think having the book and being a television personality helps your profile in terms of attracting?
If you want to have credibility, just get on TV.
As
soon as you're on TV, everyone thinks you know what you're talking about. It's amazing. It has an amazing effect.
I'm trying to get on TV. Do you know anyone? Can you introduce me to anyone?
Sure. And then because it just builds social norms, builds confidence. It's kind of like a stamp of credibility. But I think I once gave a talk, and somebody sent me an email after this talk, and I've still got the email, and they said, "Oh, hi Adam, you're obviously a really awkward guy, but somehow you've managed to turn awkward into awesome. Can you, what have you done, or how do you do that?" And I do like the idea of just using what you've got and amplifying it. And if you are a bit fat, then don't try to hide it by wearing baggy shirts. Whatever your weakness is, just own it and embrace it. And that's probably what your defining character is anyway, and it's probably how people recognise you anyway, so you don't have any choice in it. So, and again, same goes for brands as well. We're constantly trying to make them all glossy and shiny and smooth. A little bit of shit, people kind of get attracted to that, so don't try too hard to get it all perfect. And again, coming back to the agency, and why I'm probably enjoying that process is we're not hard on ourselves, we try to do the best we can and keep on moving forward.
At the risk of using a buzzword, it's just being authentic, isn't it?
I think so.
Especially with the online explosion over the last 10 years or so, that authenticity is something that people are craving, because they're so used to seeing the best version of everyone's life on Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook. If you're just authentic, it really cuts through and resonates with people.
And it goes against, especially when you're marketing or branding, for some reason we feel like we have to present a glossy veneer of that. Whereas many other industries, like the entertainment industry, politics, whatever, they know that you have to have a double-sided coin.
What's the one thing that's keeping you awake at night right now about starting Thinkerbell?
Keeping up.
Keeping up with the work, or keeping up with trends, or keeping up?
Keeping up with the work. So that's just trying to button things down, and we want to say, you want to say yes when you're in business. You want to say yes, and saying yes is the easy part. It's then making sure I'm following through and doing a good job. That's the hard bit. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and joining us on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I could do this for hours, but we're out of time. So, Adam Ferrier, thank you very much.
It's very nice energy. Good.
Thanks. Well, I hope you enjoyed getting to know Adam Ferrier as much as I did. I seriously could have spent hours unpacking his brain, and hopefully at some point in the future I'll have the good fortune of having him back on the show. Everything you need to know about this episode and the show notes and all the links we talk about, including OMG Yes, that fantastic edu-porn site. All the links and all the show notes will be at wpelevation.com/Adam Ferrier. That's all one word, all lowercase, of course. And please subscribe to the podcast at iTunes because it really does help us come up in the search results and get our podcast in front of more WordPress consultants just like you so that we can help more people and impact more lives around the world. Give us a 5-star rating and leave us an honest review and tell us what you think of the show. And leave us a comment under this episode at wpelevation.com/Adam Ferrier. This is the final episode of the WP Elevation podcast for this season. We're going to take a few weeks off, but we will be back with another season in a few weeks. So I hope you can join us then. Until then, I'm Troy Dean. Go Elevate.